What is up? Welcome in. Welcome in. Thank you for joining us on another episode of SODFS. We are back with week 2 NFL Main Slate breakdown. I am Dan. You can follow me on Twitter at Dan Brown NFL. And with me tonight, my co-host Nate. You can find him on Twitter at Nate_FFL. Nasty Nate. What's good, my guy?
What's up, man? It's a long week, but none of that matters now because football is back for the weekend. We get to see how much we threw away our off-season research for a week 1 overreaction and see if we're right on some stuff too. So I love the early season, man. It's particularly fun for DFS, and I'm ready to get into this big show we got.
Yeah, transitioning from week 1, obviously we want to react to what we saw, but you don't want to overreact to too much of anything week 1. We put all this effort and into the off season and what we think is going to happen, and we can't be afraid to necessarily pivot off of some of those notions, but don't necessarily write them off after seeing week 1. Trey Lance, Justin Fields aren't complete garbage. Week 1 is not necessarily a fair assessment for what these guys are going to bring to you year round. So take everything you saw week 1 with a grain of salt, but at the same time, it's all information that we're going to continue to get week in and week out. And so now we're heading on into week 2. But before we get into some of the guys that we really like, I do want to take a minute to mention that SODFS is officially part of the Fantasy Points Media Group. Make sure you guys check out all of the great content that Fantasy Points Premium Access has to offer. Use our promo code SUNS22 for 10% off your subscription today, and just score more here in 2022. Nate, I am excited for week 2 here. Let's move on into some news and notes before we get into some players that we want to highlight on the week 2 main slate.
Yeah, we've got a good handful of stuff going on here. First, we're going to start out with a little bit of news concerning last night's game, Thursday Night Football. Chargers coach Brandon Staley says quarterback Justin Herbert was diagnosed with a rib cartilage fracture and that he could be back at practice next week. That's a bit surprising to me, but in a way it's not also. I know rib injuries are tough for a normal person, so playing football with it's definitely not going to be a fun thing.
Yeah, no, he's a tough dude, man. He's got that dog in him, as they like to say these days. So hopefully he'll be back to keep dominating those offensive snaps there. So I love it.
Yeah, the Chargers need him, and we need him for DFS too. Another quarterback, Patriots quarterback Mac Jones. He's been limited in practice this week with both a back injury and a bit of an illness, but he's officially removed from the injury report and will play on Sunday. Another guy that is expected to play Sunday, something that we probably should be surprised about, but we're not. Steelers running back Najee Harris has the foot injury he's been dealing with, but he is expected to play on Sunday as well. And a guy that will not play is Colts rookie wide receiver Alec Pierce. He has a concussion symptoms and has already been ruled out. Not too surprising considering, the way the NFL approaches head injuries these days. So to be expected, I think.
And Cowboys owner Jerry Jones seems optimistic that Dak Prescott could return in 4 weeks from his bone fracture in his hand. Jerry opted not to place Dak on IR, and while many of us are left scratching our heads, we'll see what Jerry Jones and the Cowboys have in store. Until then, I'm probably not going to have much exposure to any of that Dallas offense over the next couple of weeks. I mean, they didn't look that great with Dak there under center. I don't expect a better outlook for any of those guys involved moving forward, at least until Dak gets back, and even then temper expectations. But what it does is it does allow us a team to target. This week it is the Cincinnati Bengals that get this matchup against Dallas. And yeah, their defense can have some turnovers and yada, yada, but that offense isn't expected to do much. That's going to leave a lot of opportunity for Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Joe Mixon, that Bengals DST that was priced down at $2,200 before the Dak Prescott injury came out, making the Bengals DST the chalk of the week. I think they're coming in at 22% ownership as of right now, and I wouldn't be surprised if that gets higher. So that injury has implications for not only the Cowboys offense moving forward, but any teams that they face over the next couple of weeks while we sit here and see what's up with Dak Prescott.
Yeah, I fully expected Jerry Jones to be optimistic, and more power to him. Will Dak be back that quick? That's hard. It's hard to say. But yeah, that Bengals DST is looking real nice, even though they are going to be very, very, very highly owned.
Steelers officially placed star TJ Watt on injured reserve, so he's likely out for the next 6 weeks with that torn pec. Huge blow to the Steelers offense, huge blow to the NFL. Such a fun guy to watch, an absolute athletic specimen out there, just making plays that not many other guys in the NFL are playing. So he will be missed. Until then, TJ Watt, sir, get healthy.
Yeah, that's a real bummer. Like you said, Watt is a ton of fun to watch on the field, and that Steelers defense, in my opinion, was kind of trending in the right direction. So losing one of their biggest stars on that defense is certainly not going to help. But we do have some good news about the AFC North. Ravens running back J.K. Dobbins took a big step forward this week, becoming a full participant in practice as of Wednesday. That's huge news, not only to Ravens fans and fans of J.K. Dobbins, but everybody that plays season long fantasy football and DFS as well. The next guy I'm going to talk about is Saints quarterback Jameis Winston. He's dealing with a back injury. We've seen him go into the tent during last Sunday's game. That is reportedly why he was taken into the medical tent. He is dealing with some kind of back injury that I don't have exact details on what that is, but he was limited in practice early in the week.
49ers tight end George Kittle returned to practice today for the first time per local media. A big step forward, but it is still up in the air as of now if he is going to play in Sunday's home opener versus Seattle. Whether or not he plays, I don't know that I'll have a ton of exposure. If he does get absolute a green light prior to kickoff, and maybe we're going to see his ownership remain relatively low coming off the injury and the week 1 performance from the 49ers, there might be some leverage there against the field. And we know this guy can make it happen just as well as any tight end in the game. So something to monitor here as we head into Sunday for sure.
Yep, and then some other notable names that, as far as NFL DFS goes, Rondale Moore is still going to be out. Wan'Dale Robinson is going to be out for the Giants. Chris Godwin's still out for the Bucs. Zach Wilson's still out for the Jets, and Michael Gallup's still out for the Cowboys.
Well, it's that that sport, man. Injuries every year, and it's just playing that game. Luckily with DFS, it doesn't sting quite as long as these season-long leagues, but it's still something that's going to happen every week, and all we can do is adjust and move forward. So, Nate, with that being said, you ready to move into the QB position this week?
Yeah, man, I am absolutely ready. The guy that I'm going to talk about first for the quarterbacks is going to be Bengals quarterback Joe Burrow against the Dallas Cowboys that we have already talked about. He's priced at $6,600 this week on DraftKings. And Dan, I'm curious to hear your thoughts when I run through a little bit of this stuff here, just because I'm high on Burrow personally, but I'm also a bit worried, and you might be too. Last week, Burrow's 53 pass attempts were the second most of his career, and that's also the second time he's had to attempt 50 or more passes in a game. He did not play well last week. I think we talked about it in the SOD group chat a little bit, but he threw 4 picks in that game and only 2 touchdowns. A lot of that, in my opinion, had to deal with the pressure that he was under. He was sacked 7 times and took 11 hits. So the Bengals haven't fixed that offensive line the way that we would have hoped, but I think it's still a work in progress. Now, my hesitation with Burrow this week more comes from the side of, does Cincy get up big early with Cooper Rush as their opposing quarterback? With that in mind, they also are going to have to get up big by scoring points. So maybe I'm overthinking it. I'm just kind of curious, Dan, what your thoughts are on Burrow.
Yeah, I mean, I like him as I mentioned. Just attacking that Cowboys team right now seems like a good move. I think Mixon's going to end up being super popular, stacking with that DST. So that plus the picks that we did see from Burrow week 1 once again may keep Burrow's ownership down at a reasonable rate. I haven't looked. I'll look here as the show goes on and see what he's projected at over there at fantasypoints.com. But if it's low, And now potentially T. Higgins is out of the equation too. If everybody's going to attack Mixon, I mean, we saw what Jamar Chase could do this past week. I think obviously people will be on Jamar Chase to an extent, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of people on Burrow this week. And if the field is going to have a microscope on Joe Mixon, well, let's take that leverage and flip it on its head and perhaps make a Joe Burrow stack that's even potentially condensed down a little bit with T. Higgins concussion this past week. Not sure if he's 100% green lighted for this week or not. If he misses time, then you have a condensed Burrow stack with the leverage against the Joe Mixon field. So I like that call right there, Nate.
Yeah, and another thing to consider too is that the Cowboys defense didn't necessarily look like big money either. So it's still early in the season, and both teams still figuring stuff out. So it'll be interesting to see how they match up this week.
All right, a guy that I like this week, especially a cash game. It looks like he's going to be one of the more popular QBs on the week. That's Derek Carr, Las Vegas Raiders. He's coming in at 6,200 this week against the Cardinals. And, we just saw the Cardinals get embarrassed week one by Pat Mahomes and the Chiefs, though. But when diving in on this particular matchup there at fantasypoints.com, I was reading a Wes Huber article, and he goes on to say about this matchup this week that only 3 other QBs see as big of a fantasy points per game improvement across from cover one as Derek Carr at 23%, and no other quarterback attacks this scheme with a bigger jump in air yards per attempt, targeting 25%. And on 24% of dropbacks over the last 3 seasons. Plus last week, across from cover one, Carr completed 21% of his attempts for 28% of his yardage, 31% of his touchdown strikes, and only 20% of his interceptions. So he's got another quality matchup here in a scheme that he has thrived against in the past. We already know where the targets are going. So, obviously paying up for Derek Carr or paying up for Devontae Adams. Luckily, Derek Carr's price is still reasonable, so you can lock that into a cash lineup pretty easily. I like both these guys this week.
Yeah, I like that call a lot, man. It's probably my second favorite stack this week, and probably would be my first if there wasn't a stack that I like more that's a little bit cheaper. And I'm going to talk about half of that right now. First half's going to be quarterback Carson Wentz of the Washington Commanders. He's facing my Lions this week. He's priced at $5,800 on DraftKings. And first and foremost, I'll say I'm not one for chasing points, and I try not to overreact as much as possible. But what Carson Wentz accomplished week one against the Jaguars is something that you really should not ignore. He completed 27 of 41 attempts for 313 yards and 4 touchdowns. He did do Carson Wentz things like throwing 2 interceptions, but it can be argued, it's still early in the year. He's still adjusting to this new offense. And he gets to face, like I said, my Lions this week, who just allowed 32 offensive points to the Eagles in week one. So I'm loving Wentz at the price. I love a lot of his wide receivers, Curtis Samuel, Jahan Dotson, the rookie, Terry McLaurin, even some running backs. But we'll talk more about those guys later. But man, I'm loving Wentz for week 2.
Yeah, he's cheap, and again, he produced this past week, and looked pretty good doing it. So I wouldn't mind having. That's a game that I think could be pretty fun to attack. There's just some pieces on both sides of the ball there with Detroit and now Washington that are pieces that I am looking at this week. So that could be a sneaky game to try to stack up and get some exposure to. And if you want to take Carson Wentz over Goff, I think that makes sense. But that Detroit just has plenty of bring back options if you wanted to go that route. I'll take a minute and mention our guy Matt Ryan again coming in this week. He was a little shaky this past week. This week he's coming in though still at a reasonable price tag, $5,500. But this past week, the Jags, who Matt Ryan will be throwing against this week, allowed a total of 52 points to opposing wide receivers. 2 of those players ended up having 18 or more points. So Ryan did start slow this past week, but he ended up salvaging his days, connecting with Pittman for that touchdown and finishing up with north of 350 yards. This game currently has the Colts at -4, so the game could be relatively close throughout. I do like the salary as a salary saver option at 5,500. I do like Matt Ryan. Again, I'm probably taking Pittman along for that ride if Pittman plays.
Yeah, 100% agree. The price is very fair still at 5,500. And, you can stack Matt Ryan with Jonathan Taylor. But like you said, I think it's a Ryan Pittman stack. If you do go with Ryan, you go with Pittman as well, who's also priced at a very reasonable amount this week.
Jonathan Taylor, I just do want to take a minute to mention, after coming in at roughly 22% ownership this past week, right now he's projecting at 8 to 9. So that might be an angle to look at anytime those types of guys. I mean, you got Saquon Barkley, rightfully so, up there at 24% projected right now. Darrell Henderson coming in around 20%. Leonard Fournette around 17%. So JT is coming in sub 10. And if that is going to continue, I may have a little JT exposure this week.
I think the biggest reason for that, JT being sub 10% is that price tag of almost $10,000. It's just hard to get him in your lineup at 9,900. But this guy produces week in and week out. So I don't hate that call either. But a guy that I do want to talk about at running back is a guy that you just mentioned, Saquon Barkley, running back for the New York Giants. He's got the Carolina Panthers at home this week, and he's priced at $7,300 on DraftKings. So I'll be the first to admit I'm not the biggest Saquon Barkley truther / fan, but last week he was simply sensational in his 2022 debut on Sunday, leading the league in rushing with 164 yards off of 18 attempts and 1 touchdown, while also adding 6 receptions for 30 yards on 7 targets. I think that what gave him that little extra bump there is definitely those 6 receptions, considering the fact that DraftKings is a full PPR scoring format. Barkley played on a bell cow's 83% of the snaps, also leading at the position, as well as a team leading 33% target share. He had the best single game performance since week 16 of 2019. He sees usage like this for the remainder of the season. He could absolutely finish as the RB1, and that's something that people were saying at the beginning of the year, but something I never personally considered. But he looks good. He looks healthy again, and I think that clean bill of health is probably the biggest beneficiary for Saquon Barkley at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, he looked explosive. He looked like the Saquon Barkley that we have been wanting to see, and it is something that I would absolutely be here for if it continued throughout the year. 7,300, absolutely smash all day. Love Saquon Barkley. Another guy right there in that price range that I've mentioned, and I'm going to talk about a little bit more. That's Joe Mixon, 7,200. Both these guys are going to be straight cash this week at the running back position. And as you mentioned, it's hard to plug a JT in at 9,900 when you have guys like Saquon Barkley, who did what he did last week here at 7,300. Joe Mixon, whose usage was out of control in week 1, even though the fantasy points didn't necessarily come along for the ride. What we saw usage wise from Joe Mixon is an absolute smash value here at 7,200. And so I'll talk about him a little bit more. He's favored by the Bengals are favored by 4 points in this matchup, and when that's been the case in the past, he averages 19.5 fantasy points per game. And as I mentioned, the game script in this could really favor Joe Mixon. We don't expect this Cowboys offense to get going a whole lot. While yes, the Bengals do seem intent on letting Burrow drop back 40 times a game again this season, Joe Mixon was still getting the usage. According to Scott Barrett's expected fantasy points chart from week 1, Mixon led the league with 29.6 expected fantasy points while finishing the week with 21.5 PPR points. Now, again, you factor in that usage with this game environment. I mean, Mixon has all the upside that you could want. That price tag there, 7,200, just below Saquon Barkley. Again, Barkley, Mixon, both these guys, lock them in for your cash lineups.
Yeah, Mixon's a really good shout. I think, as you mentioned, the game script is going to fall into his favor. And, even before they get up big, if that is what happens, he's still, a receiving threat. Say T. Higgins does miss the game. Sure that there's other guys that'll benefit from that. But, Joe Mixon's going to be the guy right there, too. Ready to catch the ball. So I think that just helps the case for playing Mixon this week. But there's another guy I want to mention that's right around that $7,000 price range. That's my Lions running back, DeAndre Swift. As we mentioned, they're at home against the Washington Commanders this week. And Swift has been a guy that we've really pounded the drum on since the beginning of SODFS last year. He's now averaging 19.4 fantasy points per game across his last 11 fully healthy games. He's also caught at least 3 passes in all 11 of those games and has widely outsnapped Jamal Williams 67% to 33% in week 1, even though we did see, Williams get in there and get the goal line work after Swift helped get the team down the field. But I'm always big on Swift. I will sway away from him if the matchup's not right, though. That's not happening for me this week, though. I think that the Lions are going to need to get Swift heavily involved if they want to keep up with this newly founded Washington passing attack.
Well, I will see your Swift at 7,000, and I will raise you Javonte Williams at 6,500 this week. Now, Melvin Gordon outcarried Javonte Williams 11-6 on early downs there on Monday Night Football, but Williams did get all the 2-minute drill snaps and ran 29 routes to Gordon's 13. And as we've all been talking about the last few days, Javonte saw 12 targets in this game. Again, going back to Scott Barrett's expected fantasy points model, I talked about how Joe Mixon ranked first. Well, right here, Javonte Williams came in second among all running backs with expected point total of 25.9, and he ranked fourth best among all running backs in total team expected fantasy points with 26.5%. So last year, the Texans gave up the fourth most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs while allowing the second most yards per carry. Javonte Williams seems to be the guy that is going to get a lot of those valuable touches. He's got the explosiveness to take those touches to the house. And if they're going to give him any type of usage in the passing game like this moving forward, you can count me in at 6,500. He's another guy that I'm not going to hesitate to click into my RP2 spot this week.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing Williams' sophomore season in the league, so it's another year acclimated, but it's also his first year with Russ Wilson. So that, we're early on in the year this year, we're getting to see kind of who Wilson tends to target and things like that. And like you said, if it continues to trend in this direction, man, Williams just has more and more upside for me, especially at the beginning of the year when his price tag's down in the sub 6K range. But before we kind of jump away from these mid 6K range guys, I do want to give a quick shout to Antonio Gibson of the Washington Commanders. I mentioned that Washington passing attack, but Gibson also deserves some recognition. He ran 23 routes last week, a mark that he exceeded just once last year, and also finished with the second best PFF receiving grade among running backs at 86.5. So Gibson's a guy a lot of us weren't really on during the offseason, a lot to do with, the choices that Washington made in the draft. But we all know what happened with Brian Robinson, and we keep wishing him for, to get well soon in a speedy recovery. But for now, we didn't really see J.D. McKissick step up in that Washington backfield. They just tended to lean more on Gibson, if anything. So I think he's well worth a couple GPP plays at 6,200.
Yeah, I like that call. I mean, he saw 14 rushing attempts, another 8 targets with that. That's some pretty good usage. Carson Wentz seemed intent on getting the ball to his running back. So I like that call right there. I'd ride with Gibson in this matchup as well. Another running back who I think is going to end up being fairly chalky given his price tag, that's Darrell Henderson at 5,700. He played on 82% of the snaps in week 1, and Twitter absolutely lost it. The Cam Akers hype has been unreal the last 6 months prior to the season. And if you were investing in Cam Akers at any point in any draft this offseason, quite frankly, you're pulling your hair out after what we saw out of week 1. Now, again, Sean McVay, who knows what he's going to do, but for right now, this is Henderson's backfield. So I had a ton of Henderson exposure, best ball late, not too much Akers, and so I'm I'm pretty happy about it, to be honest, but I think he's an excellent value play this week again. Again, a run-heavy game script against a team that gave up the 8th most rushing fantasy points per game this past season in my Atlanta Falcons. Given how much he played in this opening game, the backfield appears to be more his than ever for right now anyway, and he has had his share of injuries over the past few seasons, but right now, McVay is essentially giving Hendo the nod, and 5,700. I'm going to ride with that again. My Falcons, they get crushed religiously, and so why not take advantage of that? And a $5,700 price tag there. I'm going to have some Henderson exposure this week, Nick.
Yeah, I'm not afraid to say it, man. I'm ecstatic as hell. If you watched any of our SOD shows over the offseason, in relation to Dynasty and just redraft fantasy football, there was quite a few of us that are on the team that were saying how much Cam Akers looked like shit when he came back at the end of last year. He's obviously continued to look like shit in camp and in preseason because McVay's not believing in him. He's leaning on Darrell Henderson, a guy that has also had, a past of, multiple injuries. So until he gets hurt, I do think right now that this is Henderson's backfield, or until he does something dumb that jeopardizes, his playing time. But for now, yeah, I'm riding Henderson. I love that call.
Another guy I'll mention who probably be pretty popular, as he was one of the most popular waiver wire pickups here for week 1 and moving into week 2. That's Jeff Wilson, 49ers running back, versus Seattle, coming in at 5,100. That's RB34 pricing. Now, over the last 2 seasons, Wilson has averaged 16 fantasy points per game in the 11 games that he has earned at least double-digit targets. The Niners are heavy 8.5-point favorites versus Seattle, who just got absolutely torched by Javonte and co., which is on par with this past season when the Seahawks allowed 28.9 fantasy points per game to the position, which was the second worst in the league. So Jeff Wilson stepping on up, next man up there for Kyle Shanahan. He's the one who's most familiar with the Shanahan system. I believe this is going to be his backfield this week. Yes, are we going to see maybe TDP and Mason sprinkle in and get a little bit of usage? Sure, but I think Jeff Wilson is going to see the bulk of the carries here for San Francisco, and against a team that just is absolutely giving away free money to the running back position. Jeff Wilson, chalk him up, 5,100 this week.
Yeah, I don't hate the call. I don't love it either. I have been a Jeff Wilson supporter in the past, but I'm not a big fan of the 49ers backfield. And I think what it's going to come down to for me is his projected ownership. I need to see what he's coming in at come Sunday morning, because if he's anything over, I would say probably 12%, and I think he will be come time, it'll probably be a little bit more of an avoid for me, but I don't hate the call.
All right, well, let me give a little shout out to my guy, Playoff Lenny, Leonard Fournette, week 2 Lenny. He looked fantastic in week 1, and he was treated as an absolute bell cow. Before the game got out of hand there in the fourth quarter, Fournette handled 91% of the snaps in the first 3 quarters. Now, banged up receiving corps with Godwin, Mike Evans likely getting the Lattimore treatment. I think Playoff Lenny could be flirting with double-digit targets this week, so just something to think about. His ownership's not too bad. It was hovering around 14-15% last I looked. That could end up moving on a little bit up there, but Playoff Lenny, somebody to keep an eye on this week.
Yeah, again, I'm just kind of neutral on that one. I don't hate Fournette. I don't love the call, but yeah, I think it's a good shout. I don't know, man. I think there's just better options out there around that price range. Before we dive,
Nate, I like to go deep. All right, so we're gonna get there, and we're gonna touch a lot of guys.
It's not the playoffs though, so Playoff Lenny's not here yet. That's all I'm saying. No,
that's fair.
I'll leave it alone. Before we go into the wide receiver portion of the show, I do want to give a shout out to our brothers at fantasypoints.com. Before we were partnered with Fantasy Points, we were customers of Fantasy Points. Fantasy Points has a ton of great data. With Fantasy Points, you have access to the newest and best website in the industry for your season-long daily fantasy and NFL betting needs. Access to articles, live streams, podcasts, cheat sheets, community chat, online tools, and more are all available at your fingertips. It's the only subscription you'll need this football season. You can sign up for Fantasy Points premium content using our promo code SUNS22 and get 10% off at fantasypoints.com. Go check it out, because if you ride with Fantasy Points, you'll score more in 2022 and beyond.
That's right, baby. I love to score more. Let's talk wide receivers, Nathaniel. I'm going to start out. I already mentioned a stack I'm on, and it's, you know, that those Las Vegas Raiders, and I'm talking about Davante Adams coming in at age 600. The Raiders didn't even try to run the ball this past week. They led the league with early pass down rate of 75.5%, and we're in 11 personnel, which 3 wide receivers for those noobs out there, on an 87% of their passes. He got fed an absolute ridiculous 45.9% of targets in week 1. I am going to chase that target share around like it's the food truck when I'm at the beach. I don't care what they say. If it stays like that, I'm going to chase it. 8,600, sure, I'll pay that. That's no problem. This is DK, right? Point per reception. Yeah, 8,600. That's a value. Davante Adams is coming in at a value this week, and if people don't want to pay up for him, I don't care. Derek Carr is cheap enough to where you can pay up for Davante Adams. Again, I'm locking him into my cash lineup this week. 8,600.
Yeah, I think if I had the choice to pay up between, you know, the number one stud at a position, say Jonathan Taylor at 9,900 for the running backs, or Davante Adams as the top wide receiver at 8,600, I'm going to go Adams, because I think they both have pretty much the same floor this week, in my opinion. So I love that call. Like we said earlier, Adams Carr is one of my favorite stacks. But real quick, going back to another stack that we've already kind of briefly mentioned, the wide receiver that I'm going to talk about is Jamar Chase, the wide receiver for the Cincinnati Bengals. He's priced at 8,000 this week. They're going to Dallas to face that banged up Cowboys team. And I think this play for Chase, for me anyway, is going to be if I play Burrow or not. So since week 15, his week 15 dud last season against the Broncos, where he was 1 for 3 receiving, Chase is averaging 7.6 receptions, 127 yards, and almost a full touchdown per game over his last 7 contests. I like Chase just a little less than Davante this week. Chase fabricated a 3 for 41 in one line. Fabricated a 3 of 41 in one of his 10 out of 129 and one receiving line across the single coverage last week. The Cowboys used the highest cover 1 rate last week, and Chase averages 6 more fantasy points per game in games that T. Higgins basically has sat. So I don't know if Higgins sits this week. I wish I had more info. I think I seen that he was trending in the direction of playing. I could be completely wrong on that, but I think either way, Chase is a solid play if you're locking Burrow and Joe Burrow into some lineups.
Yeah, I love Chase. I had a good bit last week, and he came through decently for us. A guy I mentioned earlier, Michael Pittman, coming in at 6,700 this week. Again, if you're going to dance with Matt Ryan, you got to bring Michael Pittman along with you. He got 13 targets in week 1. It was the second most of any game he's had in his career. Prior to joining the Colts, Matt Ryan's wide receiver 1 has historically averaged 17.6 fantasy points per game, which would have ranked no worse than wide receiver 7 since 2019. Michael Pittman is the guy there in Indy. Whether JT is rushing for 160 plus yards or not, Michael Pittman's going to get his 6,700 this week. Yeah, I like him.
Yeah, Pittman's almost a guy that I would play even if I don't play Matt Ryan. You know what I mean? Just at that price tag, you can kind of squeeze him in there with some other guys around this price range too, like a guy that I'm about to talk about, and put yourself together.
Pittman is sitting at around 11% projected ownership right now, so that's not too bad there.
No, that's not bad. I actually seen some stuff on Twitter earlier in the week where people are, saying that they're not that high on him this week and stuff like that. But I think it's ludicrous,
he did pop up on the injury report as well. So if he weren't to go, I think we might have to consider JT's price tag there at 99. I know it's not pretty, but if Pittman's gone, I mean, obviously, I don't want any part of Matt Ryan. Yeah, so it might become pretty one-dimensional, and it might be a full fade in effect. So something to keep an eye on, Michael Pittman, as far as his status goes. That does change things as far as that Colts offensive game plan goes.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% worth mentioning. The guy that I'm going to talk about is my favorite wide receiver play of the week. I've been tweeting about him almost at an obnoxious rate this week too. That's Amon-Ra St. Brown of the Lions. He's priced still down at 6,500. He's taken on the Redskins this week with a whole slew of guys that I want to play. So I like playing Amon-Ra as the kind of bounce back in those stacking scenarios. St. Brown has seen at least 10 targets in each of his last 7 games. Last year, only 12 players earned double-digit targets in 7 or more games. Last season, Washington gave up the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing outside wide receivers at 23, and the 5th most fantasy points per game to opposing slot wide receivers at 15.1. I put out even I should have brought some of the tweets with me to the show, but basically, if you go back to week 12 of last year when Amon-Ra St. Brown really began to start to show through the potential that a lot of us seen in the offseason before that, he scored a touchdown every week besides one since then. I mean, obviously, I seen Trav in the chat there. Me and Trav had a small conversation on that touchdown rate cannot obviously continue forever with him scoring at least once per week. But right now he's Jared Goff's safety net. And until, that changes, I love both him and DeAndre Swift a lot. I think that this week is not the week where we start to see Amon-Ra St. Brown slide backwards.
Yeah, Amon-Ra's a dog, man. And dogs get targets. That's what it comes down to. All right, let's run through some of these cheaper guys. I'm going to, we'll try and keep it moving through some of these lower end guys. And I'll start with the guy, Christian Kirk, coming in at 5,700 against these Colts this week. Christian Kirk got 12 targets from Lawrence for a 29% target share. We had a feeling that Kirk was going to come in and really be the guy in this offense. Preseason came and we saw that was looking like it was going to be the case. Week 1 only confirmed those priors. So Lawrence absolutely peppered Kirk with targets during the preseason. Everything pointed towards Kirk having a monster season. 150 to 160 targets is absolutely a possibility for Kirk this year. 5,700. I don't mind bringing him along.
Yeah, someone's got to catch the ball in Jacksonville, and for the amount of money he got paid, it should probably be him. The guy I want to mention is Tyler Boyd. This comes with the asterisk of if T. Higgins plays or not. Basically, if T. Higgins doesn't play, I do like Tyler Boyd quite a bit at 5,400. Higgins' status is still up in the air for week 2, so until probably Saturday or Sunday, we're not going to know more. But Tyler Boyd's somebody to keep in the back of your mind.
What about your Detroit Lion, DJ Chark, coming in at 5,100? Talking strictly as a GPP play, obviously, but where are you on Chark? And as far as you giving us some inside information on those Detroit Lions, I know we love Amon-Ra, but DJ Chark, any exposure for you this week, 5,100?
Yeah, it would be GPPs like we mentioned. I think that Chark basically is a big upside play and not someone you want to lean on in cash games, should I say. So he had a decent week 1, 4 of 8 for 52 yards and a touchdown. I just think that he needs those touchdowns to really keep consideration. He's priced at 5,100, so I'll probably throw him into a few tournaments.
All right, what about Curtis Samuel, Washington Commanders, 4,600? I know that you mentioned Carson Wentz and his options. Curtis Samuel made some noise week 1. Maybe he's finally turning the corner as far as his health is concerned. You interested in him at 4,600 this week?
Yeah, I really like him a lot. And it's not – I like to think it's not – a complete overreaction to last week. For me personally, it's seeing him out there healthy and then seeing him as basically as Carson Wentz's safety net, like we said, for Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jared Goff. Samuel had 11 targets last week, caught 8 of them, 55 yards and a touchdown. He also got 4 carries for 17 yards. I think it was, I know I was, I think you were as well. We were really high on Curtis Samuel last offseason going into the 2021 season, but then he just had an injury-riddled year, and we didn't really get to see him live up to that potential. But now he's got that clean bill of health, man, and he looks ready to prove himself. And I like what I see, and I really like the price tag of sub 5K. That's just beautiful.
Last guy I'm going to mention coming in at 5,500, wide receiver 24 pricing is hat tip Julio Jones, Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We know Godwin is out and Evans, as I mentioned, is going to get the Lattimore treatment. Julio looked great week one. We talked about that a little bit pre-show. He was getting some downfield looks, so I think he could be in for a monster game against, this NFC South rivalry game against the Bucs with the Saints here. So I like Julio Jones and not necessarily Tom Brady this week, but Julio and playoff Lenny, week two Lenny, forgive me. I might have a little bit of exposure this week.
Yeah, I don't want to beat a dead horse. I'm not the biggest Julio Jones fan at this point in time. I don't hate it though, man. To each their own. I think it could end up being a solid play. I did not get to watch any of his game film from last week, so I'm probably not the right person to, judge how his 2022 season is going.
Well, he worked as the wide receiver 2 behind Mike Evans on Sunday and got 5 targets for 69 yards and running a route on 76% of Tom Brady's dropbacks. Those are pretty good numbers. Godwin out of the picture. I could make a case for the crafty veteran who's setting NFL records every year. I could make a case.
I mean, I guess you got a slight point there. I do want to give a shout out to Will in the chat. Will's a buddy of mine from the Mitten here. He says, what about Jerry Jeudy this week? He is only 5,600 and had a pretty good game last week. I don't hate it. I think Russell Wilson's still coming into his own in Denver, and it is their home opener, so I think that stadium's going to be bumping. And, Judy's at that mid 5K range. I don't hate that at all. His ownership probably won't be nothing really to worry about, I don't think either. So what do you think, Dan, about Jerry Jeudy?
Yeah, I was scrolling trying to find his ownership. He must be pretty far down there. So I actually, oh, here he is. He's coming in hovering right around 9 or 10%. So I passed by him the first time. No disrespect, Sir Jerry. I like the matchup though this week. I think I was reading one of the articles on Fantasy Points. I think it was Wes Huber's advanced matchups, and he loves Jerry Jeudy this week. He thinks he's pro Jerry over Sutton this week. The price tag is there for it to be beneficial. So I like the call. I'm going to have some Jerry exposure. Jerry.
Yeah, I agree. And thank you, Will, for watching, man. We appreciate you. I want to throw a couple tight ends at you, Dan. I noticed this week on the show sheet, something we did was kind of went back to our old ways of trying to save money at tight end. It has worked for us in the past. And I think that the way it's working out this week is we'll probably be back down in that same tier. We're looking right around 4K. There's a couple guys I want to bring up to you. The first one's going to be Pat Freiermuth of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They're playing the Patriots this week, and he's priced at 4,400. I think that I did watch some of that Steelers game last week, and it was just blatantly obvious that Mitchell Trubisky is not Big Ben. Even Big Ben late in his career, Trubisky wasn't really working through his reads. He was kind of getting to a second read, panicking, dumping it off, something that Mitchell Trubisky has done throughout his career. But he did still manage to find Pat Freiermuth 5 times, actually targeted him 10 and had 75 yards. So if he had a touchdown to throw in there too, you'd be looking at a pretty solid fantasy day. And then another guy I want to get your opinion on is Tyler Higbee of the Los Angeles Rams. Higbee is a guy that gets a lot of hate on fantasy Twitter from what I see, but in my opinion, he's a perfect plug and play tight end for, redraft, even dynasty, and for DFS as well. He had the second most targets on the Rams team last week, obviously behind Cooper Kupp, but Matthew Stafford's always been a guy that's looked for his tight ends, and he should throw for more than, 40 plus attempts this week. So I think he'll be looking for Tyler Higbee in the end zone. And all it takes is that one touchdown at $4,200 to make it a successful day, at the tight end position.
Yeah, man, I'm if I had to pick between those two, they're both similarly priced there. Now, as you mentioned, I am looking all the way down. We had Bellinger last week at 2,500. Well, I'm scraping the barrel again at 2,500 this week. But if I'm looking at these two options, I think I'm going to lean towards Tyler Higbee. Not only am I going to pocket the $200, but I think the Pittsburgh Steelers versus the Patriots game just kind of feels like a game that I don't really want to have a ton of pieces of. Sure, maybe a one-off and if he gets the targets, but The Steelers just aren't a team that I'm really wanting to attach my lineups to right now. And you could say the same for New England. All in all, I think it's a game that I'm not going to have a ton of exposure to. But this Rams versus Atlanta game, I mentioned Darrell Henderson. Maybe we have an A-Rob bounce back game, but Tyler Higbee, he seems to be the guy there. So I like Tyler Higbee, but again, I'm going to look even cheaper. A couple of other guys. We got Taysom Hill. He's right there in that same range, 4,400, same price as Pat. And while Pat got those targets, we saw that usage out of Taysom Hill that kind of makes him unique there for the tight end position. They just showed us that they're going to use him in a variety of different ways. This guy on any given play could drop back to throw a pass. He could have a 40-yard scamper, or he could be running little tight end routes and end up, helping Jameis Winston out of a bind. He remains to be a cheat code Swiss Army knife there. And while it doesn't necessarily feel safe or even sexy, Taysom Hill offers a decent amount of upside there at the tight end position. So somebody that I just wanted to kind of put a little bit of spotlight on this week. Once again, that matchup against the Bucs, whether they're beat up or not, we expect Tom Brady to put points on the board. Alvin Kamara, a little banged up. I'll have to check in on his tag. That could make Taysom Hill a lot more appealing if Alvin Kamara were indeed to miss this game. So just something to monitor.
I like Taysom Hill a lot, man. I've always been a big fan, and anytime I can, tout the name Taysom Hill, I'm going to do it. He's not only a Swiss Army knife, he's a red zone Swiss Army knife. So he's going to see when he comes in the game, it's usually when they're by the end zone, which gives him an opportunity to score fantasy points. So I like that. I like that call a lot. One more tight end that I wanted to mention real quick. He's down at 3,600 is your boy Hayden Hurst, former Atlanta Falcon. He's now with the Cincinnati Bengals. He saw 8 targets last week, caught 5 of them for 48 yards. While running 52 routes last Sunday. He's a big red zone guy. It could match up well versus that struggling Dallas team that we've already talked about ad nauseum on this episode. If you remember, CJ Uzomah popped off for a few big games in 2021. And if T. Higgins does indeed miss the game, then Hayden Hurst, could easily find pay dirt on Sunday. So just something to consider, but you also want to keep an eye on the injury report come Sunday morning.
Yeah, again, attacking those Bengals this week seems to be a strategy that we are pushing. But we've made it all the way down here to the tight end punt play of the week, 2,500, sticking with the New Orleans Saints. If you're not getting Taysom Hill usage at 4,400, well, come on down to Jawan Johnson, tight end for the New Orleans Saints, coming in at 2,500. That's tight end 45 pricing on this slate. And for week 1 tight ends, our guy Johnson had the 11th most targets with 5, the 8th most routes, and the 11th most receiving yards with 43, while playing mostly out wider in the slot. No, he's not going to come out here and break the slate wide open, but what he's going to do is allow you not to make a bonehead selection tight end at 4,500 or plus who ends up just crapping all over your lineup. 2,500, you just need this guy to show up with pads on and he brings back value. So Jawan Johnson, I like him this week as our punt there at 2,500.
Yeah, I love your tight end punt plays of the week. It's one of my favorite parts of doing this show. You nailed it with Johnson though. It's low risk and medium reward, so definitely well worth it at 2,500. Anything you want to say before I start wrapping it up?
Yeah, I got something I want to say. I want to say, man, Brother Matt, we appreciate you each and every week coming in here and designing these layovers for SODFS, working with us as Nate and I are adding stuff to the show sheet last minute. We're taking stuff off that's been there all week, 5 minutes before the show gets going, and you put up with our shenanigans off the air, and more importantly, our shenanigans while we're here on the air. So I just want to take a minute to say, Brother Matt, who is here with us tonight, as he is every night, behind the scenes, making the magic happen, interacting with the viewers, letting us know when somebody has written a comment on there asking a question, and if we don't see it, he lets us know about it in the little private chat feature here that StreamYard has. That's great, StreamYard. We appreciate that. But Matt, not as much as we appreciate you, man. So that's just the only thing I really wanted to get said here, Nate.
Yeah, I'll never be able to echo that sentiment enough. We definitely appreciate you, Brother Matt. You are the glue of the operation. and you deserve all the credit in the world for keeping this thing running and dealing with me and Dan, as he mentioned, making changes left and right in the middle of the night, hour before the show. We appreciate all your hard work quite a bit, man. I want to give a shout out to the Sons of Dynasty YouTube page. If you guys are not subscribed yet, the biggest favor that you could do for us is to go to the SOD YouTube and drop a subscription. Check out some of the great videos we have on there. We have Dynasty stuff, we have DFS stuff, we have redraft stuff. We had lots of great guests over the off season. So find a video you like, give us a thumbs up on it, leave us a comment, let us know what you didn't like too. But first and foremost, just drop us a sub at the SOD YouTube. It would mean the world to us. And I wanted to give a shout out also to Veridian.com, Veridian Global. They design all of the SOD gear, all the SODFS stuff, as well as fantasy points stuff too. So you can get anything you need basically in this fantasy community over at Veridian Global. They make great stuff, and we're very thankful to have them as a part of our brand.
Yeah, man. Big shout out to Brother Matt. Big shout out to you, Nate. Shout out to Beezy. Shout out to Coach. Shout out to Rusty. Shout out to Lindell, man. Shout out to Sons of Dynasty. Appreciate all of you guys. Creating content with you guys year round has been wonderful. And diving in here on week 2 now, it's fun, man. This is what we do it for. It's back. Football, college football tomorrow. Be diving in on some DFS college football stuff tomorrow. I'm busy. This will be the last episode that I do here in the Mountain House up here in the beautiful mountains of Chickamauga, Georgia. We closed on our new house today. We're moving further south, closer towards Atlanta, back to our old stomping ground. So as of next Friday, I will actually be going live from the new studio. We'll figure out how it goes, but I'm excited, man. It's going to be a hectic week this week, but I'm not going to let it get in the way. We will be here again next Friday night and bringing you everything you need to get into the week 3 main slate breakdown. But this one was fun, man. A lot of guys here that we could get excited about for this week. Some fun games, just like this one that we saw Thursday night. So I'm excited about week 2, Nate.
Yeah, man, I'm pumped up, and I'm ready to make some money tomorrow on some college football lineups. Just be sure to share your knowledge, because you're far better at college football DFS than myself. And congratulations. Right, guys, I wanted to tell you congratulations too, before we go off the air, to you, your wife, and the boys on the new house, man. I'm super ecstatic for you.
Appreciate that, man. We're super stoked. We signed everything today, went down there, got the keys, let the boys just go, tear through it before we get everything in there. So this week we're going to be finishing packing, getting ready to load up the moving truck Friday, getting down there, basically building the desk, plugging in the computer that evening, and firing up week 3. So I'm excited about it, though. But Nate, anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Nope. I'm ready to win some money this weekend. Hope you guys are too. And I cannot wait to see you stream from the cab of your truck next week when it doesn't work out right.
Hey, we're gonna do what we have to do, but make sure if you guys have any questions, hit us up on the YouTube comments, hit us up on Twitter. We'll try to get back to you with anything and everything we can between now and then. And everybody, just enjoy your weekend, have a good time, watch some football, hang out with your family, squeeze your loved ones tight, and until then, much love to everyone out there.
Peace.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.